500 years ago, a legendary group of heroes under the command of the great General Helena Tarsis took a stand for those who could not and formed the Legion of Dawn. It was they who constructed the first javelins. It was they who were the very first javelin pilots, and many say the greatest. It was their skill and courage that allowed human civilization to develop. It was their skill and courage that allowed for the advancement of small, exposed villages and in the construction of fortified settlements like Fort Tarsis that kept the people safe from the corruption and danger of the outside world. It is from this legacy that we, the group known as the Freelancers, have descended. Ladies and gentlemen, today we're going to be diving into the lore of the Legion of Dawn and the one and only General Helena Tarsis. There's a lot of fun stuff to dive into with this chunk of lore, especially when we actually take a closer look at the very first javelin, the Javelin of Dawn. So we're going to dive into it, dig it all apart today, and it'll be a jolly good time. At the end of all of this, I will say, for all of the questions we've had answered, there's a lot more questions that we're going to have based on this information we've gotten. So if you feel like this spawns any new questions and you want to discuss those questions, feel free to do so down in the comment section below. But I want to move forward by talking a little bit about the impact of this individual piece of lore. Because for all intents and purposes, this is the history of the Freelancers. This is where the Freelancers began. We now know a rough point in time 500 years ago where day zero was for the javelins and the Freelancers themselves, the people who now look to defend the people within the walls of Fort Tarsis, much like General Helena Tarsis did with her village 500 years ago from that monster on that mountain. That's really cool. That creates a really powerful emotional connecting point for players to say, hey, I kind of know where I came from and why my character as a Freelancer is here. I have a general idea before I even play the game. That's not something you get a lot in storytelling, especially for video games. More often than not, you're just like, hey, you're a super soldier and you've got some armor. Your name's Master Chief, Spard 117. And then the books come out and the books tell you all about the lore, but you might have to wait for that, or maybe even takes years for somebody to create a set of prequels to explain how it all happened. You know, sometimes stories just kind of start in the thick of it. And while there's, I'm sure, many stories that could be told back before Helena Tarsis, this is a pretty good starting point in my opinion. And I like having that, individual hero and her group of warriors who looked to stand out and essentially prevent the extinction of humanity. I mean, that's actually what they did. This was a huge turning point for the existence of humanity in the world of Anthem. They could have all just been wiped out by the many creatures and mutations and beings that were being presented into the world by the Anthem of creation. But they weren't because of Helena Tarsis and the Legion of Dawn. Now let's talk about the very first javelin, the Javelin of Dawn. It was created by an individual known as Arden Vessa. He was a follower of Helena Tarsis and a great inventor of his time. He built the Javelin of Dawn, one each for every member of the Legion. And the Javelin of Dawn is actually the predecessor to the Colossus, which we obviously know is a current javelin in our portion of the Anthem timeline. When we take a closer look at the Javelin of Dawn, there's some interesting things here. I mean, number one, it's a huge, bulky javelin. It reminds me a lot of a suit of armor that you might find for a knight, but it wasn't actually wielded by some rich dude in a castle who was looking to slay dragons for his beloved. It was actually built and crafted and then piloted and wielded by the peasants who might have existed outside of that castle, looking to defend themselves against the danger of the wilds. It's kind of what I like about the story of Helena Tarsis and humanity, I guess in this case, in the Legion of Dawn, is that they were just essentially some peasants just trying to live in this terrible, violent world, and they built awesome and magnificent things, and they found bravery and courage to fight some of the most, terrifying beasts like the Ash Titan, all for the sake of surviving. I like that portion of the story very much. But when we take a closer look at this armor, it comes across as armor designed for melee combat. Those really high shoulders, sort of the cowl we get around the helmet protecting the user's head from any sort of incoming blows or attacks. But there's something more special here. And I actually saw quite a few of you guys point this out, and I was really impressed by it, because it took me a while to notice it. Probably like a couple days of actually looking at this before I realized that there were two seals located on the left forearm of the Javelin of Dawn. Right there, you see them? They look almost identical to the seals that we see on the storm. Now, this makes a lot of sense if you look at the Legion of Dawn trailer, because there is a very significant point in that trailer where Helena Tarsis raises her sword into the air, charges it with lightning, seemingly that came from the sky, and then uses it to thrust her sword into the ground to create an electric eruption, destroying many enemies around her. It's a pretty magnificent scene in that trailer, and to me it screams elemental control. So even though we know right now that the Dominion created the storm and the Arcanist had to adapt that technology so the Freelancers could have access to the storm, it appears that the same people who created settlements like the walls of Fort Tarsis already had access to the seals. They had already figured out how to use seals technology, and in this case used it to power one of the Javelins of Dawn at least Helena Tarsis's Javelin of Dawn. That is one of those new pieces of information that leads me down like 20 spiderwebbing paths of questions. And I could sit here and I could start rambling them all off, but I won't. I think it does give us a lot to think about, though. You know, just who is the Monitor? We already have a vague idea that he was someone who once existed and lived within the walls of Fort Tarsis, but who is now sort of left and decided there's a better way to deal with the Anthem. Those walls won't protect you forever, right? That's his ideology. So how did the Dominion get the tech before the Freelancers? The thing that I start to think about, we're going to be on the realm of speculation at this point, is that while the Freelancers know Helena Tarsis was someone who helped create the first Javelin, what if there was a huge gap in the timeline? You know, 500 years have gone on. That's not to say that in those 500 years, the Javelins have been passed down every single generation up until now without any issues, without flaw, right? What if there was a gap in the timeline, maybe even a couple 100-year period or 100-year period, where people lived within the walls of Fort Tarsis, but the Javelins weren't there. They didn't understand how to pilot the Javelins, they didn't have the technology, or they had to craft the Colossus, which could have been the first Javelin at this point, from just remnants of Helena Tarsis's armor, you know, just blueprints, leftovers, right? So they didn't understand how to adapt the seals technology. And the Dominion, the Monitor, perhaps left the people of the walls of Fort Tarsis with the knowledge that he could adapt seals, and then went ahead and did it himself. There's a lot of potential there for, you know, for like, I guess you could say the theft of tech and ideas, and not really necessarily the theft, but the lack of sharing those ideas and going out on their own, because we do know that the Monitor uses the seals to control creatures to fight for the Dominion. We've seen this in the trailer, so yeah. Those seals, man, there's some significant stuff happening with those seals. They are far more than just, oh, this is what powers the elemental forces of the storm. These seals obviously have a really powerful role in the world of Anthem, both for the Freelancers and for the Dominion, and 500 years ago for Helena Tarsis and the Legion of Dawn. And I think that's really, really freaking cool. So I'm curious to see if we ever get a substantial explanation of the timeline between Helena Tarsis and now. When and how was the Colossus constructed? The same thing goes for the Interceptor and the rest of the Storm story, as well as for the Ranger. I would love to know how they were built, when they were built, why the seals technology wasn't adapted by the Freelancers until after it was adapted from the Dominion. These are all questions I now have that I would like answers to, but I like having those questions, and that's what really excites me about this piece of lore we got for the Legion of Dawn. It introduces a couple characters from the past. Again, from an emotional standpoint, it really helps ground us in that story and in that world. When launch day comes for Anthem, I'm ready to jump in and be a Freelancer who understands that I exist because of the work of Helena Tarsis and the Legion of Dawn. We are here with these great walls standing around us because of individuals like General Helena Tarsis. And that's kind of a classic heroes, you know, story, looking to the past, having legends to connect to, and I just totally dig that. So head over heels with this piece of lore, and there's one last thing we can talk about that has a lot of gameplay implications, and that is the Fortress of Dawn. So the Fortress of Dawn is supposed to be the place where great artifacts from the time of Helena Tarsis have been tucked away. They're sealed behind the doors of the Fortress of Dawn, and they have been sealed for many centuries. No one has been able to get in, no matter how hard they've tried, is basically what they're saying. Now, that could have a lot to do with a gap in technology acquisition for the Freelancers. That could have a lot to do with why they weren't the first ones to understand how to harness the power of the seals for something like the Storm. And it also gets you wondering, will we ever be able to get into the Fortress of Dawn as players in Anthem? Whether it's around launch time or post-launch, this could be a great opportunity for endgame style content. It could also be a great opportunity for BioWare to introduce a 5th Javelin into the fray. Now, it would be cool if they were like, oh, there's a new Javelin coming. The Arcanists have developed this new technology, right? And they tie it into a piece of story DLC for Anthem, and they're like, oh, we made this hybrid blah, 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 from this blah, 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 blah. What would be even cooler is if the very first Javelin that was added to the roster as Javelin number 5 was the very first Javelin ever created, even if it was just a modified form of the Javelin of Dawn. Another slightly elemental Javelin with more melee-based technology making its way into the fray would be a huge, huge addition to the game, and I know there's already a bunch of you sitting at your screens right now just like, yep, do that. Give us the sword. We want melee weapons. And to briefly touch on that, for those of you who don't know, BioWare has said many times, all they have right now at launch are those 4 bespoke melee weapons. They don't have exact plans for melee weapons in the future, but they're not at all ruling out the idea of expanding into the realm of more melee-focused combat post-launch in the future of Anthem. That is the purpose of a live service game after all. So lots of cool stuff here. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the Legion of Dawn. If you've got any personal speculation, any theory crafting you've done based on the lore we've gotten, based on just the statue we have of Helena Tarsis in her Javelin of Dawn armor and her sword, feel free to leave it all down in the comment section below. This is definitely a really fun one to talk about, and I would love to hear what you guys have to say about it. I'd like to close out this video, especially as we are so deep into the holiday season, and take some time to thank all of my patrons. There are a lot of you guys at this point, and while it may not seem like a crazy amount of money to get like $40 or $50 extra every single month through all of the wonderful support from folks like you over on Patreon, it does so much for me. It helps me take care of like my Adobe subscription. It's helped me make sure that I've got money put aside for 2 copies of Anthem, one on Xbox One and one on PC. I cannot thank you guys enough. Most recently, Trevor S., Tabasco de Gama, Survivor, Sawyer Fox, Nemasari, Mike D, Miramoose, Joseph L, Jack and Mandy, Cody K, Kato Genesis, Bad Company Sarge, Alex C, and Sekye. A special thank you to Sekye, who's been supporting this channel for many years at this point. And a thank you once again to each and every one of you. You do a lot more than you might imagine by supporting the channel here on Patreon. It helps me take care of a lot of bits and bobs, especially during the holiday season when the budget is tighter. So I hope you guys all have an incredible holiday, as I hope the rest of you do as well. I will see you tomorrow for that insane Stronghold stream from the Interceptor's perspective. It's gonna be pretty freaking hype. I'm just gonna straight out say it. It's gonna be hype. I can't wait. Thank you guys so much for watching. And as always, be awesome to one another. Because, man, you don't live in a small village at the bottom of a mountain with a crazy giant monster on top of it. But if you did, I bet you'd hope that you were awesome to people like Helena Tarsis, so she would think more about saving you when the shit really hit the fan.
The most